Leaders' questions. I call on Deputy Neil Hall Martin.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Tanaiste, you know, and I think we all know that the rehab organisation has been asked by the Public Accounts Committee and has indeed been before the Public Accounts Committee to answer very important questions in relation to salaries, pensions and a whole range of other issues pertaining to the organisation. And I think for good reason, and I think we'd all agree that's in the public interest, just like other organisations in the charitable area who have significant and substantive service contracts with the state. And in the context of rehab, you're looking at about 80 million worth of funding from the taxpayer to rehab. So it's clearly in the public interest that those who are asked to go before the Public Accounts Committee would do so. And there has been an unacceptable degree of prevarication and delay by the rehab organisation in its dealings with the Public Accounts Committee. And in particular, I think people were surprised and very taken back by the refusal of former Chief Executive Officer Frank Flannery to appear before the Public Accounts Committee. A strategic advisor to the Taoiseach, his right-hand man on many fronts, who would know really the importance of the Oireachtas and of committees like the Public Accounts Committee, and has not gone forward to answer questions that remain unanswered. And I think what was really unacceptable is that on the very day Public Accounts were meeting with rehab, and Mr Flannery was actually in Leinster House on other business, which was metaphorically giving the two fingers to the Public Accounts Committee, which I believe to be unacceptable. And I'd ask you, would you agree that that's unacceptable? More so, the reports in the Irish Times that organisations like Rehab, and Rehab specifically, was paying its directors, and it's reported that Mr Flannery was paid to lobby Fine Gael ministers and Labour Party ministers. Now, I would ask you, Tanaiste, do you accept the principle that it's wholly wrong for organisations, charitable organisations in particular, who have such substantive service contracts with the state, to be paying its directors money to lobby government ministers to arrange meetings with officials in government departments? That fundamentally that's an unethical principle to go with and to adopt. And I'd ask if you would accept that that indeed is unacceptable.
Thank you.
And finally, my final question is that Mr Flannery has been appointed by the government, by Minister Hogan, as chairman of the Forum on Philanthropy. And that's an organisation, and through Mr Flannery, has been lobbying for changes, for example, to tax rules and residency governing tax exiles. Is it appropriate in your mind that he should continue on that position whilst still refusing to go before the Public Accounts Committee, a cherished institution of the Oireachtas?
Well, first of all, I was asked this question here on Thursday, and I stated on that occasion very clearly, and I repeat again, that I believe that Mr Flannery should attend before the Public Accounts Committee. Now, I have seen the letter that the clerk of the Public Accounts Committee has written to the Chief Executive of the Rehab Group. It's a letter that was issued yesterday, which makes it very clear, which names a number of people, including Mr Flannery, that the committee wishes to interview. And I believe that all of those that the committee wishes to interview should appear before that committee. With regard to the issue of lobbying, this government, lobbying is a part of, I suppose, our democratic system. People have a right to lobby. But what we do need to have around lobbying is transparency. And this government has been preparing legislation to provide a regime whereby there will be a register of lobbyists, those who are engaged in formal lobbying, professional lobbyists. There will be a requirement for them to register, and there will also be a requirement to record the lobbying that takes place. In other words, that the public will know who is lobbying whom and for what. That legislation is at an advanced stage of preparation. The general scheme of the bill was submitted for pre-legislative scrutiny by the Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform Committee, and their report has now been received. The drafting of the bill is proceeding, and Minister Howland plans to present the bill to the Houses of the Oireachtas early in the second quarter of this year, so that when that bill is enacted, we will have a register of lobbyists and we will have a transparent regime in relation to lobbying. With regard to Mr Flannery's position as chairman on the Forum on Philanthropy, it is my understanding that he is stepping down from that position.
First of all, thank you. Thank you for your comment, Tanaiste, or your view that Mr Flannery should go before the Public Accounts Committee. I agree with you on that. I'm somewhat curious that you perhaps didn't respond to my question in relation to the appropriateness, the correctness of organisations like Rehab in particular, charitable organisations who provide services for people with intellectual and physical disabilities, and who have large service contracts with the state and the provision of such services, that they would pay their directors to organise meetings with ministers and with government officials on behalf of such organisations. I think personally, my own view is it's wrong. They should not be paying their directors money. No one should in that situation. We're not talking about private companies or anybody else. We're talking about people who have daily meetings with the state in terms of the services they provide, ongoing meetings. And I think it's extraordinary that someone with the unrivaled access to power that Mr Flannery had, probably still has, should be paid. It hasn't been denied. There's been no clarification around that Irish Times report or no rebuttal of it. I find that extraordinary, that someone really at the centre, I mean, Minister Quinn said he would be met regularly on the Tuesday morning of cabinet meetings. And I think there should be very clear statements, apart altogether from a lobbyist bill, that organisations like that who deal with the government on a very regular basis, be it the Brothers of Charity, be it Enable Ireland, be it Rehab, they shouldn't be paying people to meet government ministers.
Thank you.
One thing you can say about our system, it is accessible. And I'm not casting any aspersions on ministers or anything about meeting, Rehab or organisations like that. 80 million is the scale of money that the state pays out in terms of the services provided by Rehab. And so the meetings are quite regular in terms of those service contracts. And there's absolutely no basis, in my view, or foundation or rationale for any organisation to be paying large fees to its own directors with a view to organising meetings with government ministers or indeed with government officials. And I would ask you, would you accept that view?
Honestly.
Well, I don't know what arrangements were made for payment between Rehab and Mr Flannery, other than I read the reports in the newspapers as you have. It would seem to me that the appropriate place for that issue to be pursued is at the Public Accounts Committee. And again, I would encourage Mr Flannery to attend that committee. I think the issue of, we've had, this whole issue of lobbying is not a new phenomenon, and it's not a new problem. And we have back over the years, we have seen a lot of issues arising from lobbying and who's paid and who has access and so on. There's nothing per se wrong. There is nothing per se wrong with lobbying. People lobby all of the time. What we need to have,
Allow the answer, please.
What we need to have is absolute transparency about what is happening in the area of lobbying. We need to have a record, and this is what the legislation will provide for, that when somebody walks in the door to a government minister or to a department, there will be a record of what was asked for, who asked for it, and on whose behalf did they ask. Secondly, where people are lobbying on a professional basis, on a paid basis or on some kind of a remunerated basis, there will be a register of those lobbyists which will identify who the lobbyists are, who they are acting on behalf of, how much they are getting paid, who they are lobbying, what they are asking for, and who stands to benefit from it. That is the transparency that we need to have around lobbying. And by the way, no, Deputy Martin.
Please.
Deputy Martin,
we're over time.
You had a long period of time.
We're over time here.
You had a long period of time, Deputy Martin, to reflect on this, and indeed a period of time when we had tribunal after tribunal examining issues of lobbying where senior figures in Fianna Fáil were involved. And as far as this government is concerned, there will be legislation. It is in the process of preparation. There will be legislation that will provide for absolute transparency in the area of lobbying.
Thank you. Deputy Adams. Deputy. Just settle down, settle down. It's Deputy Adams. Your name isn't Adams. Deputy Adams, thank you. Would you give Deputy Adams a chance? Thanks very much. Thank you.
Tanaiste to the Taoiseach is meeting the British Prime Minister today, and I understand that they will discuss trade, energy supply and the North. And in the wake of remarks last week by the British Secretary of State Theresa Villiers, I hope that the Taoiseach will remind the British Prime Minister of the government in London's outstanding obligations to the peace process. Among other issues, the British government has failed to implement key parts of the Good Friday Agreement, including Act na Gaeilge, the Civic Forum, the Bill of Rights and other issues of equality and human rights. They've also refused to establish an inquiry into the murder of human rights lawyer Pat Finucane, the Ballymurphy massacre, or to hand over files in relation to the Dublin Monaghan bombing, despite a call to do so by the Oireachtas. And I suppose more significantly and up to date, we're now entering the third month since Dr. Richard Haas and Professor Megan O'Sullivan presented proposals which followed lengthy discussion with political parties and others. And you know that the UUP has rejected these proposals. The DUP have yet to support them, but that they're largely supported by Sinn Féin, by the SDLP and by the Alliance Party. So, Tanaiste, I think that recent history teaches us that the Unionist parties will only positively move and address issues if encouraged by both governments to do so. Running away from the Richard Haas proposals won't achieve anything, but in fact will encourage those who are against progress. So, Tanaiste, will the Taoiseach make it clear to the British Prime Minister that negative engagement by London and rowing back on commitments by it is deeply unhelpful?
Thank you.
Well, as Deputy Adams has said, the Taoiseach is meeting with the British Prime Minister today. This is now part of a regular annual meeting, summit meeting between the Taoiseach of this country and the Prime Minister of Britain to discuss issues around our bilateral relationship. And clearly, the issues of trade, of tourism, of investment, of our bilateral relations, and of course the issue of Northern Ireland will form part of those discussions. There are immediate issues that do have to be addressed. I'm disappointed, as I'm sure Deputy Adams is, that insufficient progress has been made in the discussions following the work that was done by Dr. Haas and Dr. O'Sullivan just prior to the new year. I was reasonably satisfied that progress was being made in the discussions among the party leaders in Northern Ireland. That has, to some extent, been derailed recently, arising from the Downey judgment and the fallout of that, the controversy arising from it. But I would hope that following the St. Patrick's Day period, that it will be possible to get those discussions back on track and to make progress again. Because the three critical issues which arise in that area, how to deal with the issue of flags and identity, how to deal with the controversies surrounding parading, and how, of course, to deal with the very controversial area of the past. These are issues that do have to be grappled with. I've discussed these issues on a number of occasions since the new year with the Secretary of State. I've discussed them as recently as yesterday with her. I plan to meet her again following the St. Patrick's Day events, and I would hope that it will be possible shortly after the St. Patrick's Day period to have the regular Quad meeting that the Secretary of State and I have with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. We're overdue such a meeting, and I think that that meeting and that format, I think, would be a useful forum in which to try and get things back on track. As Deputy Adams says, there are issues which are still unimplemented. There is still unfinished business from the agreements, and the Irish Government continues to pursue those with the British Government.
Thank you. Deputy Adams.
Well, you will know, and we've talked about this privately, but you will know that the concern is that the Unionist parties, particularly the Democratic Unionist Party, have put back the issues and the proposals put by Richard Haas and Megan O'Sullivan until after the local government elections, which brings us into June. And then, of course, June means the marching season and so on. So I think there needs to be a very particular focus. And it isn't even that the British government has been disengaged. I would be the last person to complain about British government disengagement from Ireland. The fact is that its engagement has been negative. It has not been therapeutic, it has not been positive, and it has been in breach, as I have already enunciated and you have acknowledged, of agreements made in international treaties and in other agreements between this government and the London government and between people across the island. And I mean, one of those issues is the issue, you mentioned the John Downey judgment, is the issue of on the runs, and it's one of several, this issue of OTRs, legacy issues that is common to all conflict resolution processes. It isn't just an Irish issue. It's wherever there are efforts made to move from conflict into peace, that's one of the matters that has to be dealt with. And the two governments agreed at Weston Park some long time ago that that issue would be resolved. And it's a very, very graphic example of an issue not being resolved despite entreaties and representations by Sinn Féin over the years. And then we can see how it comes up and is used, or it has a negative effect on the process, and then there's a stall in what needs to be done. So Taoiseach, as our Tanaiste, would you agree that there has to be a very, very basic principle in terms of peacekeeping, and that is when agreements are made, when commitments are given, that they have to be kept, and that has to be one of the primary ongoing tenacious forensic focus of this government with your counterparts in London, that they have to keep agreements that they made?
Thank you. Tanaiste.
Yes, I do agree that when agreements are made, they have to be kept. I also think it is important that the two governments continue to work hand in hand and jointly in relation to the Northern Ireland peace process. I have a good working relationship with the Secretary of State. We talk regularly. We talk in the institutional format that I've described. There is a very good working relationship at official level, and I believe it is very important that the two governments, who are the joint guarantors of the agreements, should work together, and I hope that will continue to be the case. In relation to the issue of the OTRs to which you referred, which has obviously come into public discussion arising from the Downey case, there was an understanding at Weston Park that this would be a follow-on issue from the arrangements that were made as part of the Good Friday Agreement. To be fair, there was an attempt to legislate for it. And you're aware of the legislation that former Secretary of State Peter Hain brought forward. I think it was 2005, 2006. Agreement wasn't. There wasn't agreement on that legislation, as you know, arising from which administrative arrangements were put in place to deal with the issue. I'm encouraged by what Prime Minister Cameron said when he was questioned about this, and that is that he does not wish to unpick difficult decisions that were made by the previous British government as part of the peace process. And I think that is important, that there isn't any unpicking of difficult decisions that were made and arrangements that were put in place. But what we do need to do is we do need to build and to move on. And I think that the issue that we need to address post St. Patrick's Day, the St. Patrick's Day period, is the continuation of the Haas-O'Sullivan talks. It is not satisfactory to the Irish government that this is an issue that is parked until after the elections in May, because, as you say, if we do that, we will be into the marching season. One of the critical issues, which is part of that discussion, is how to deal with the contentious issue of parades. And, of course, there is the continuing issue, which continues to emerge from on a very regular basis about issues from the past and the hurt and so on that's associated with that for families and survivors that has to be addressed. So as far as the Irish government is concerned, our approach will be, and as I said, I discussed this with the Secretary of State as recently as yesterday, our approach will be to try and get things back on track as quickly as possible after the St. Patrick's Day period.
Thank you. Deputy Collins.
Tanaiste, there was a number of issues I would have liked to have raised this afternoon, but the one I will raise, an issue reported in the papers late last week, and it relates to returns by the Irish subsidiary of Apple, Apple Sales International, based in Cork. Now, while Apple Sales International Limited is an unlimited company here and not obliged to make annual returns to the Companies Office, I had to make returns in Australia due to different laws there. And according to those returns, in the years between 2004 and 2009, Apple was able to cut its tax bill by referring to an income tax at lower rates. In these years, Apple calculated its tax with reference to the 12.5% corporate profit tax in Ireland. It should have paid $890 million on this basis, but only paid $36 million to the Irish Exchequer. $36 million is close to the 2% rate Apple claimed it had with Ireland at the US Senate committee last year. In these accounts from 2004 to 2009, Apple does not claim to be using its stateless tax designation. It claims to have availed of income taxed at lower rates. Even a very powerful multinational like Apple is not going to be able to set up its own tax rates, so there's a number of questions that arise from this revelation in Australia last week. Was Apple able to avail of a rate lower than 12.5% between the years 2004 and 2009? If so, what was the rate applied? And then who decided on this lower rate? Before you reply, Tanaiste, we're all very aware of the loophole which allowed not just Apple, but a range of big multinationals to effectively avoid tax has been closed from January next year. My question relates specifically to the returns made by Apple in Australia for the years 2004 to 2009 and their claim of income tax at a lower rate, which this government has refuted over the last year.
Thank you. Tanaiste.
Cancórla, the issue of effective tax rates has been the subject of a number of public discussions over the last 12 months. It has been acknowledged by the OECD, the European Union and the G20 that international tax planning is an international issue, and the Irish government is working within these organisations to reach a solution. The recent coverage of multinational profits in the case of Apple was based on historical accounts from 2004 to 2009 that used a stateless company structure. As you know, we addressed the issue of stateless companies in Budget 2014, and the government is fully committed to the OECD project known as BEPS, Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Project, the international project progressing with support of G20 to deal with this international issue. There has been an allegation that Apple had some kind of a special deal with Ireland. We have consistently rejected the allegation of a special deal, and indeed Mr. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, also corrected the record in that regard in May of last year when he spoke at the All Things Digital D10 conference and stated, "We have no special deal with the Irish government." With regard to the allegation that Apple paid only $36 million on tax on $7.11 billion of profits, I think it's important to clarify that there are two separate scenarios that are often confused in discussions on the effective rate of corporation tax. The first is the global rate of tax, which is paid by multinational companies who operate across a number of jurisdictions. This is a blended rate which takes into account the amount of tax charged from across all countries that a company trades in, and not just in Ireland. The extremely low effective rate figures that have been quoted recently in Apple's case and attributed to Ireland are based on a flawed premise. The figures are estimated by dividing the amount of Irish tax paid by a total profit figure that includes substantial profits made by companies that are not tax resident in Ireland. They are running together the profits earned by group companies in Ireland and in other jurisdictions, and incorrectly suggesting that Irish tax does or should apply to both. Ireland cannot tax profits that are properly attributable to other jurisdictions. The ability of some multinationals to lower their worldwide rate of tax using international structures reflects the global context in which Ireland and indeed all countries operate. The best way to effectively address this issue is for countries to work together at the international level, and the appropriate action is being considered in this regard by the OECD as part of their project on base erosion and profit shifting, and Ireland is participating fully in this process. The second issue is the effective rate of tax applying in individual countries. Clearly, the domestic rate of tax paid in Ireland is within the control of the Irish tax system, and Ireland is responsible for the amount of Irish corporation tax that is charged here. All companies operating in Ireland, domestic businesses and multinationals, are chargeable to corporation tax at the 12.5% rate on the profits that are generated from their trading activities here. A higher 25% rate applies in respect of investment, rental and other non-trading profits, as well as certain petroleum, mining and land dealing activities, and chargeable capital gains are taxable at the capital gains tax rate of 33%. Some other countries have a higher headline rate of corporation tax, which is then supplemented by a high number of tax reliefs which reduce the overall rate of tax paid. By contrast, the approach in Ireland is transparent. We have a competitive headline rate of corporation tax which is applied to a broad base.
Deputy Collins.
Protecting jobs. Protecting jobs.
Would you mind stop interrupting other people in the middle of leaders' questions? Thank you. Well, I don't care whether it's the truth or not. You're not to interrupt. Deputy Collins, please. Sorry, would you please allow Deputy Collins? Would you please allow Deputy Collins without interruption? Thank you. You got silence when you were speaking. Please give it to Deputy Collins.
I think Tanaiste, that people lost the plot about 2 minutes ago in your reply. The fact of the matter is that Apple Sales International were able to show in their books in returns in Australia that they were able to cut their tax bill by referring to income taxed at lower rates, and that was referred to by reference to 12.5% corporation profit tax. Now, there's something going on here. It doesn't add up. You can't say on one hand that there's no such thing as reduced rates or taxes, and then on the other hand say there is, or there's some way they can get around it. It's quite evident here, 36 million was paid to the Irish Exchequer from Apple. So that money has to come from somewhere. It didn't come from the 12.5% corporation tax. They're not domiciled in Ireland for tax purposes. So why did they pay it? And that answer isn't good enough. It doesn't add up. Just does not add up, Tanaiste. And as far as I'm concerned, someone is telling porkies here in some way. So I think yourself and Apple should get together and find out and present a proper response to this question. Exactly. Bring them into the Finance Committee.
Tanaiste.
Absolutely.
Sorry, would you mind please allowing this?
Excuse me, Count Corley, I've just been accused of something wrong with my tax affairs. So there's nothing wrong with the technical tax affairs. You refute that remark, and you should not be able to say that across the...
Switch off the microphones, please. Deputy O'Donovan, if you wouldn't mind only minding your... Would you please resume your seat? Resume your seat. Would you resume your seat? Would you resume your seat? Deputy O'Donovan, would you mind minding your own business, please, and stop causing problems in the chamber? Thank you.
Count Corley.
We've an awful lot of comedians here today, and these pretend... Listen, would you mind sitting down and minding your own business, please? Thank you. You're constantly interrupted. You are constantly interrupted. Thank you. I dealt with the issue. Thank you.
The position on corporation tax is very clear. We have a 12.5% rate of corporation tax. It is statute-based, It applies to profits which are earned in Ireland, and it is applied consistently. We did have a problem with this issue of the stateless company. It was a loophole that we recognised in our tax system, and the Irish government last October, when we brought in the budget for 2014, addressed and resolved that issue and ended the concept of stateless companies. There is an international issue around corporation tax, which is whereby multinational companies who operate in a number of jurisdictions and across a number of jurisdictions are able to plan their tax affairs in a way that minimises their tax contribution globally. That is an issue. That is an issue. That is an issue that has to be tackled on an international basis. The OECD, of which we are a member, is working on that. It has a project which it has undertaken some time ago, the base erosion and profit shifting project. Ireland is participating in that project. It has the support of the G20. It has the support of the European Union. It is a problem that has to be addressed at an international level.
Thank you.
Indeed, I was in the OECD along with the Taoiseach and a number of other ministers only a few weeks ago, where we discussed the progress that is being made on this issue. Ireland is participating in that project. We want to see this issue addressed at a global and at an international level, and the appropriate body through which it can be addressed is the OECD, which is making progress on it, and we're working with them on that.
Thank you. That completes leaders' questions.